Hello, Neil from Diagonal Move here. Welcome back to the channel. This is turn 6 of Saratoga, part of the American Revolution tri-pack from GMT Games, came out a few years ago. This video is going to be picking up where we left off with a brief scuffle here around Freeman's Farm, and then some fairly delayed movement over on the river road at the top here due to firstly fog and more recently something of a traffic jam. Gates's wing, which is the darker blue, are now released because this group of units here is within 4 hexes, but there's still that limitation on garrisons and needing to man the garrisons or give up victory points for abandoning those garrisons early. Generally speaking, I'll play through this a little bit quicker than I have done before. Hopefully you have a reasonable idea of how the game plays from the other 2 videos. We're really moving into the meat of the game now. All the reinforcements are on the board. There's no more weirdness in terms of one side going versus another, and the initiative rolls are determining the first player, as is standard for the series rules. I will focus a little bit more on how the solo might work. There's a couple of different ways. Basically, you play both sides equally, randomly choosing a card to determine which of these cards are going to play. That's these tactics cards here. Or you use the solo assistant if you've got a copy from either another game or, as I have, from a magazine that came out not that long ago. So you can use either, really, see how it goes. Okay, but I'll play both of those different ways once we begin to get more into the combat. I did the strict 2-player way last time. But anyway, enough being said, let's roll for initiative and get this turn moving. Okay, that's an 8 versus a 0 for the British, so it is a British initiative. The Americans do not have any momentum to overrule that, so we're just going to move with the British and go from there. So it's the movement turn. The interesting choice for the British here is, do they bother to move at all, really? Because they've got enough forces down here now to not need to get any further, because the VP hex, or the auto victory hex for the Americans, is under that bunch of units there. So there's going to be very hard for the Americans to take. The VP for Freeman's Farm is more or less secured. There's certainly enough soldiers around there, with potentially some support from some of these, to make sure the Americans don't get a hold on Freeman's Farm. And that's really all the British need to do. They don't really need to do much more than that to claim a marginal victory. Of course, if they wanted to get a more comprehensive and resounding victory, they do need to get to either that hex, or I believe it's that hex there, yeah, with the stars. And this is something I've not quite figured out about this game so far. As the British player, you can sneak a victory, or even as the American player as well, but so far in my games it's been more likely for the British to get a VP and a marginal win from the VP at Freeman's Farm. And then for the Americans, how then do you try and counter that? Because you've got a real restriction in terms of the units that can move, even allowing for the fact that Armand's wing can move quite freely and Gates's wing can move, but those garrison restrictions and the artillery restrictions even make it quite difficult to move, and the Americans are quite static, with the exception of some of these units that have moved already. But anyway, let's think about back to the British. Do we or do we not do some movement as the British player? Part of me thinks maybe, another part of me thinks maybe not. I think what it might be worth doing is moving some guys up in support of these units here, just to make sure that Freeman's Farm is completely held. And that's probably about it, actually. Clear that traffic jam a little bit. I don't feel the need to move Burgoyne's stack, which is that one there, any further. The range of that artillery is pretty poor. It's only It's only a 1 strength, and basically they can't hit at a distance of 4, so that's fine. They're going safe from any artillery fire. Okay, so let's move then finally. So this 62nd here, we're going to move these using the road rate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Move them up closer. The navy here, the navy are the ones with the little kind of white bit on, if you can see that at all, the white bit on the movement. They're the navy. They can't stray too far away from their starting hexes, so well, they need to stay near the river. Basically, they kind of travel in boats. So with that in mind, let's move those guys a little bit just to free up some of the others. Now, because we are completely blocking the road here, we're just going to move all of them 1 and then 2 using that road rate. And then the cannon will actually move a little bit further, and then the German side will actually start coming up this way. So that's going to be a movement of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Can't do that with this unit because of the rules around the Wilbur Basin Ford. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, and then 4. All these units should move individually, but because I'm avoiding the traffic jam and to save a bit of time on camera, I'm just doing them together where that's possible. So we have 1, 2, 2, 3, and then 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the rest of them are just going to come down. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's basically movement done down the river road side of things. Let's move the Jaeger units and the supporting chasseurs light infantry to the same hex as the grenadiers. No, actually, let's move them down to surround Dearborn, which is this one, and then we'll bring some of these grenadiers for the British up. They are going to stay there because they can shoot at Dearborn. That's the Spengenberg artillery. But I do possibly want to move some of the others. Right, interesting question. It's quite congested here. Let's move the 24th through the forest. Now they're now going to have to fight these guys probably, because Arnold will engage there and Dearborn will engage that one. Basically what happens is everybody has to engage everybody else. Basically everybody who's adjacent to an enemy must engage an enemy, and all of them have to be engaged. So that makes it quite a bit tricky. The 1, 2, and then 3. The grenadiers will come with, and then the militia here probably just hold up the rear, come along here. So that's 1.5, and then 2. Okay, cool. We now have plenty of people to engage the enemy. For the British, right, okay, moving straight through to rally. Nobody on the British side needs rallying, so we skip that phase. Defensive artillery fire. This is where the Americans get to fire. The only cannon within any hope of range so far is that one value, strength value cannon up the top there. This one, and the Hall. However, a strength point of 1 cannot hit at a distance of 4. So basically skipping that phase as well. Moving into rifle fire, which is going to be simultaneous. So the Americans and the British go at the same time, even though it is the British turn. Now, if I recall correctly, disrupted units cannot partake in rifle fire, and Morgan's the only rifle fire on the American side. Yeah, disrupted units cannot engage in rifle fire. Now for this particular circumstance it kind of doesn't really matter too much because Morgan here is miles away from anyone and you need to be adjacent, but the Jaegers can rifle fire against Dearborn. That's a single die, and adjacency means hitting on a 7 because the Jaegers only have a combat value of 1. We're firing at Dearborn, so 7 plus. We have a 3. That's pretty diabolical. The figure is even less when we add in the various modifiers. So basically we're firing at light infantry, meaning that 3 drops down to a 2. So that's kind of pretty hopeless there from the Jaegers. Now the Jaegers can roll a second die, if I recall correctly. However, they are in a clear terrain. Yeah, the rule there for firing twice with the Jaegers clearly says make 2 die rolls against the hit number if they are not in clear or crops hexes, and they are in a clear hex, so that's kind of out of the window for them. Okay, so this turn is moving very rapidly now, and we're coming into close combat. Now we need to just highlight all the different combats that are going on, because everyone adjacent needs to combat everyone adjacent, as I said, which basically means these units for the Allies and these units for the Americans all need to engage each other. Now the challenge for the British is how to split that combat strength. So I believe we are going to commit our stronger units against their stronger units, which makes perfect sense. So the 2 British forces under Fraser will attack Arnold. The somewhat less robust militia will fight the 2nd New Yorkers, and the German forces here, which is the Jaegers, the Chasseurs and the Grenadiers, will go up against Dearborn. Okay, so let's start just from the top there. Yeah, let's just start from the top, and we will have the Grenadiers as the lead unit against Dearborn, who is the only possible unit for the Americans that can take the lead. Okay, now as I said in the previous game, these cards, a previous video even, these cards are an additional die roll modifier. Now, I'll be honest, this is the bit that is difficult when you're playing solo. Now, I would potentially skip them, but if you skip them, you may end up with what's called a no combat result, and by not including them in the game, that's an important element that you could lose. So the way I do it when I combat is I will choose, for example, my own card. So as the British player, I might choose to skirmish, and then I choose the potential cards for the opponent, which would be the 4 that are in this kind of light yellow pale colour. And here there's only the 4, and then quite simply I just pull one at random. It's not hugely sophisticated, but that is the only way I can think of doing it, unless you do have the benefit of that solo player aid. And so here we go, we have a skirmish for both sides, meaning a grand total of 0 is the die roll modifier, but we do have combat. Okay, so let's roll that die. We have 3, 4, 5 against 3. That's a 1-to-1. You round in favour of the defenders. So let's roll that die, and we have a 7. Okay, modifying it by, and I'll use my trusty player aid here to help me here, modifying it by the adjusted morale of the lead unit. So 7 goes up to 9 because the Grenadier strength is +2 for the morale. There's no modification for the track, everyone's normal at the moment. There's no leader, there's no defending rifle unit, no one's disrupted, there's no dragoons, there's no shattered units, no defending militia. The enemy is not surrounded. There is still this space because the zone of control does not go into that space. And that's it then. There is a DRM of 9 at the end of the British calculation. For the Americans, we drop that back down by the value of Dearborn, which is 2, so back down to 7. An attacking, we do have an attacking rifleman there in the Jaegers. Now, I don't believe you have to attack with Jaegers, but anyway, we did, and that's a 6. There's no creeks, no fieldworks, no upslope, no ravine sides. So the final result is a 6 on a 1-to-1. And here, both sides retreat. Okay, now this is going to be interesting because the guys here cannot retreat. Well, I say they cannot retreat. That's not technically a zone of control. So let's just check that. Okay, the defender retreats first, and the defender can retreat into the forest. It's not a zone of control, so Dearborn just goes into the forest there, and the Grenadiers also must retreat. They go back just the one space as well. There's only one space retreat when you do a straightforward retreat. There's no adjustment of morale on any side as far as I understand it, meaning we just move straight into the next combat. No one available to move into the vacated hex there, so there's no advance after combat worries to think about. Okay, next up, Fraser and the 24th against Arnold. So we have the 1st New Hampshires and the 2nd New Hampshires plus Arnold, which is a total of 6 combat strength. Here we have 6 in total. Again, there's the Earl of Balcarres and Fraser's Rangers, total of 6 strength points, plus the 24th there, who have 4 themselves, meaning 10 versus 6, which is going to be 1-to-1 again, rounding in favour of the defenders. There's a few modifiers to consider with the leaders. Now, the way I'm going to do it from now on in terms of combat, having shown you that very simple way of doing the combat cards a moment ago, is to use this. Now, my way of understanding this is basically you choose your card and then you roll a die for whichever side you're playing against, based on whether they have a leader, whether they can withdraw, whether there are flanks, and so on and so forth. So let's go and do that now. Now, some of that I haven't covered yet, particularly the flank and the fact that there's a leader. So when you look at these things here, these colours, the tactics in pale are available when there's no leader. The light green are available when there is a leader, and the dark green is available orders when there's both a leader and an open flank. The open flank being a space adjacent to the combatant sides. Obviously, if you have a leader and a flank, you can still do any one of the other orders. So let's have a quick look. Now, really, for me, they're basically a bunch of modifiers. Now, with a leader, you can't easily retreat, so I'm going to say retreat is not possible. The enemy does have a leader. I'm engaging with a leader, so I believe we would roll for the enemy on table number 10, which would mean we would roll a d8, which doesn't come with the game. You have to provide that separately and see what happens. But before I do that, I'm going to commit my reserve as the British player, and let's roll that d8. And on table number 10, which is enemy has a leader, flank is possible, but withdraw is not plausible, then, well, actually it's not even possible, then the number 6 is an attack in echelon, meaning when I compare those things, so commit reserve as the attacker, attack and echelon is, after all that, no modifier. Okay, so there's no modifier, but let's roll that die again as the British player. Is a 0, which is frankly abysmal. We do not have a momentum jet or anything like that to have a reroll, so that's pretty diabolical, to be honest. But we can now run through that list of things that will change that die roll. The lead unit I didn't choose, but they're both the same, so it's going to be a +1, so we're now at grand total of 1, We can add on the modifier for Fraser, which is 1, so that's a total of 2. Nothing else is applicable, so we move now to the American side. Arnold has a +2 modifier, so that's straight back down to 0. And then you take off the modifier for the lead unit's morale, and again they're both the same. I should have chosen 1, but let's say it was the 2nd New Hampshire's just in case of a roll. And that was 1 again, so we're now at -1. And if this is where it stays, that means we get a momentum chip as the Americans. And I don't believe we are going to have any other right, no, there is no other modifier, so we are a -1 on a 1-to-1, which means the attacker takes a step loss and the leader can be injured. No, the leader is actually a casualty. The asterisk that we saw on the table means that the leader is a casualty, so Fraser is effectively dead, eliminated at least in game terms, and the lead unit, which was the Earl of Balakars, flips to its reduced side, and then a morale check must be made for the other units in the hex, and that would mean a roll of a die on a 5+, they stay, on a lower number they don't. It's a 6, so everybody stays where they are, that's fine, but we do need to take the modifying numbers off morale, because we had a -1 and a +1 and then a leader casualty as well. Wow, okay, I've checked the rules. Basically we need to adjust the morale check, firstly for taking a step loss, which is a -1 for the British, +1 for the Americans. But then we also, Fraser was killed, which is a leader casualty. Now in the rule book here, it says the morale needs to be adjusted whenever a leader casualty occurs, but that you see the exclusive rules. Now I've looked in the exclusive rules, and as far as I can tell, unless I'm completely missing it, there's no adjustment for leaders that are eliminated apart from Burgoyne and Gates. So based on that, there's just an adjustment of 1, even though they took 2 damage. So let's just adjust that for 1. It sounds a little bit strange to me, but it is what it is, I guess. Okay, everybody else stays as they are. And we do the final combat of this British player's turn, which is the militia here, all of whom are a bit weak and weedy compared to the regulars, against the 2nd New York there. It's a total of 3 against 2, again rounded to 1-to-1. We have a +1 for the New Yorkers in terms of their morale, a 0 for McKay Corps, who I'm going to choose as the lead unit here. That is the 0 modifier for, there we go, 0 modifier for their morale. Okay, so it's a 1-to-1. Let's roll that die. British die, it's a 6. Again, we need to think about the tactics. We have no leader. I'm not convinced they're going to do super well, those militia, so let's just stand fast. I'll roll a die. The engage without a leader. Withdrawal is plausible for the Americans. They could come this way. So therefore, let's roll a d8 and see what it says. It is a 4, which is a skirmish. So skirmish versus stand fast on here is a -1. So yeah, that's not so good for those militia on the British side. Anyway, we had a 6. The modifiers are adjusted morale, so there's no adjustment there. No leader, no defending rifle units, etc, etc, etc. However, we do have that -1, so we drop that down to a 5, so the adjusted total currently is the blue die, which is a 5. And looking at the defender, we +1 or take away +1, so that drops down to a 4 for the defender's morale. And then all attacking units are militia, attacking at least one non-militia unit, so that's another negative, dropping down to a DRM of 3 when I find the 3. And that's where we stop, a 3. Cool. So that is a 3 on a 1-to-1, which unfortunately for the British is another withdrawal. So McKay's court is going to go backwards. Then we roll a die for each of the others. That is Jessup's Corps is an 8. They're okay, even with a -1 for the morale. And then the Bouchevi is a 9. They're okay. Why couldn't they roll like that when they attack? That's what I want to know. Okay. Combat is done. There's no advance after combat because the vacated hex didn't vacate. So, where do we go from here? Good question. I believe we just do the victory check and then pass over to the Americans. We don't even do the victory check. We just pass straight over to the American side. Before I do look at the American turn, just a quick thought or two about retreat results in combat. My understanding is that morale has to be adjusted whenever there's a victor, essentially, in combat, or there's any casualties taken, that kind of thing, plus a few other things affect it. But when I look at the army morale adjustment here, there's clearly no retreat entry. So even though technically there is a victor, one side has forced the other to retreat, it does not seem that retreats adjust morale. Unless there's some kind of errata or something that I'm not aware of, but that's how I'm playing it. But just to clarify that, because normally morale is adjusted by most combat results. It's also adjusted by rallying, by removing pins when we get to any results that say pin, and also leader casualty. So there's that leader casualty exclusive rules query, where the exclusive rules didn't mention leader casualties except for Gates and Burgoyne. And then there's also the retreats causing morale adjustment, which again I'm not 100% sure of. But anyway, if anyone does know the answers to those things, let me know. But let's now jump back to the game and to the Americans' turn. Starting off with movement, as always. There's no reinforcements to replace. Reinforcements are part of the movement turn. Now, disrupted units can only move 1 hex. That's these guys here. They cannot really do much more unless they rally. So I think to allow for retreats and so on from any of these guys, I think I will move the disrupted unit, which is Morgan, back just that 1 hex. I can then perform some strategic retreating, I suppose, for these other units. Of course, what I've just gone and done is I've potentially gone and made it very difficult for myself to get those guys out of there by placing him here, because he's a 3 strength unit, even though he's disrupted, and most of these are also 3 or 2 strength units. We don't want to end up overstacked. So do I decide actually, rather than moving there, do I do a quick take back and move there to let them through? I don't know. I suppose it depends on whether or not I'm going to retreat, because if I do, I will not necessarily be extending the zone of control into the into the Freeman's Farm area, which would negate that VP still. And currently, it's still 0 VPs for the British, but we've killed a leader, so that does count towards VPs, I think, as the Americans. So technically speaking, I think the Americans are currently in the lead. And let me think about that. And then I think what I'll do is I will move the 9th Massachusetts towards Dearborn. So we've now got a light infantry and a regular infantry stacked together. That's a 1.5 movement point, but they're okay. There's no stacking challenge there. I will also take the opportunity, I think, to move these guys back. So Arnold can go 1 and then 2. The New Hampshires can go 1.5, 3. They don't get to go on the road because the road is coming out the other side of the hex. And then the New Hampshires could potentially move forward, but then if they did that, they would have to attack this side. So let's take the New Hampshires back 1, and then let's take the New Yorkers back 1 as well. Okay, cool. So that's a nice little adjustment there for the Americans, which potentially is going to let us attack that relatively weak chasseur unit and the Jaegers. But let's have a quick think about the rest of the American side. Gates's wing is released, like I said earlier, so potentially some of these guys can now start shuffling around. I mean, they can go to the yellow dotted line anyway, but let's now take advantage of that. So let's move the 7th Massachusetts 1, 2, 3. We can't go there because that would be 7. We can go underneath the artillery there. Okay, that's good. Lincoln. Oh, what are we going to do with Lincoln? He's a leader. He's currently sat on Bemis Tavern, which is a auto VP hex for the British. I think I want to bring him up to the front just so that we can add his kind of leadership weight to things should the British decide to break through next turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put him with the 1st Massachusetts. The guys here could potentially start to come round. It'd be 2 going down slope, 3 and then 4, because that's a clear hex side, which would then provide a bit of support should the British come down the river road. Or alternatively, I could do what is probably the sensible thing, if we're completely honest. The sensible thing is probably just to make sure the British don't come up here when they come up here and just sit behind our really rather quite good fieldworks at the moment, because going uphill into a fieldworks is quite a challenging position. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I will do. I won't move anybody else. And let's move on to the next phase, which is rally. We do have a rally. So now we need to do the morale check. As before, it's a die roll modified by the morale on the counter, which is adjusted by the morale modifier on the track at the top of the board there. So in this case, it's going to be a +2. Morgan's got a morale of +2. There's no negative adjustment required for the morale track. So a 5 or more, and we're good. So we've got a 7. He is freed from disruption, which is excellent. And because not only do we get to do stuff with Morgan now, we actually get up on the morale track. So things are going quite well for the Americans right now. Okay, and then we have the defensive artillery fire. Now this is quite interesting because we have the British, and at a range of 1, 2, 3, they can hit Arnold, that German allied unit. It'll be quite unlikely. It's a 9+ on a, that's a 4, so they don't do any good whatsoever. Moving to the rifle phase. Now the Jaegers were going to fire at Arnold's unit, and they're going to fire at probably at Dearborn. And again, we need to roll a 7 because they have only a strength of 1. Make sure we get the right colour for the factions. So oh, they have hit. They've hit on a 7. Cool. Okay, that means we then roll another die. We're not fighting artillery, so we have. Oh, sorry, my mistake. My mistake. We fired at Dearborn, so they rolled a 7, but using the modifiers, we have a -1 because Dearborn's in a forest, and another negative because Dearborn also light infantry. So actually, the modified fire roll for those Jaegers is actually a 5, not a 7, meaning they don't actually hit, which is a breath of relief for Arnold and the guys stuck with him. Okay, moving on to the combat. So just the one combat, same procedure as before. This time we have a leader fighting against guys without a leader attached. We have a 6 against a 2. That is 3 to 1. Wow, that's pretty good. Okay, so what were we going to do as the Americans? We have the full range of options. We have flanks available, plus the leader, which means we can do something different. Let's go to turn flank. I have no idea what turn flank will do, but let's have a go. Because if you were any sense whatsoever, you would actually withdraw as that Jaeger unit. But let's try to turn the flank. So just because I've not played it yet. Okay, for the solo using the card here, withdrawal is possible. We are at a 3 to 1 odds, so we deduct that -1 from the result. That's a D8, not D10. That is a 4. -1 is a skirmish. This is interesting. I wouldn't skirmish if that was me, but it's not me. So let's see how we go. Rolling the die. That's an 8. We are going to use Dearborn as the lead unit and the chasseurs as the lead unit for the Germans. So Dearborn plus is 2, so that's a 10 straight away. Arnold has a +2. That's a 12 on the die so far. We are attacking a rifle unit, which is now 13, and that's it. Okay, you can see why I think I wouldn't have actually done this combat as the British, but anyway, deducting 1 for the chasseurs morale, so that's a -1 on 13, so that's a 12. We are really stuck out in the open, so wow, we have done absolutely awful as the British against the Americans. The result of that tactics play was turn flank against this skirmish, and that is going to be a -1, so we're down to 11. So it's 11 on a 3 to 1. Wow. And that is captured. Attacker's choice. Well, if you don't mind, I will take the Jaegers. We then have to do a morale check for the chasseurs, which is a 3, and even allowing for the +1, that is still less than 5. They've got to withdraw 3 and be disrupted because it's such a bad result. Okay, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3. They will be disrupted. And then at least one of these guys is moving forward. So let's put Dearborn there. He's being placed by himself because really we don't want to risk the others being out in the open, and he can't have that zone of control. But now, because we've captured and we're disrupted, we need to adjust the track over here, which means we have a +1, -1 for the capture, and a -1 for the disruption. Okay, so that is pretty dire for the British there. Wow, that's really, really, really sucky. Now, what we do need to do, which I must admit I neglected to do when the previous combat didn't go so well, but that was for the Americans that time. No, it was for the British again with those militia. I forgot to give momentum. So when you roll certain die numbers in combat, if you've got a significant odds differential, either a -1 or 2 or a 10 or 11, you get momentum either as the attacker or the defender. The attacker there was the Americans, and they had a 11 or even higher, meaning they should have a momentum now. And previously they defended with a -2, meaning they should have had a momentum before. So Americans are actually 2 momentum cards to the good there. But okay, we are now at the end of turn 6, and I think I will stop the video there, moving into turn 7 in a later time. That then is the end of the video. Hope to see you next time. Happy gaming.